If what Tom Lee is predicting happens, every single XRP holder in this space will be extremely happy. And majority of XRP holders that are holding a decent amount will become extremely rich. We have to talk about this. We have to address this because it is a very high probability of happening. And it's something that you should be paying attention to, especially if you don't just hold XRP. Maybe you hold additional altcoins or just maybe you hold Bitcoin. So let's talk about what's been happening around crypto. Number one, the biggest thing right now is obviously the US-China trade deal. Everyone's talking about it. It's because it is affecting everything in a positive way. This is something that I have highlighted many times on the channel as being one of the biggest catalysts for crypto, because what's happening around stocks right now is all pertaining back to a lot of the trade deals that have been ongoing or made in the last couple weeks. We really kind of look at the UK deal, then we look at the China deal. But on top of that, we could start to see the trade war itself is starting to ease quite a bit. This is very good to see because it benefits stocks in a big way. But at the same exact time that we saw this, we also saw over $2 trillion added to the US stock market at open because of this news, because it was announced on a Sunday. And then the Monday open, well, $2 trillion was added to the market. Now, if we're thinking about this, okay, we're thinking about what happens next for crypto, what happens next for stocks. What I mainly look at the liquidity cycle, because we have been following the liquidity cycle to a T almost every single time that we do have a big bull run. For an example, you can go back to 2021 where the liquidity cycle did top, and that timed the top of the market perfectly. When we think about where we are at right now, we have a lot more work to do, obviously, but we should be topping this year, which gives us still quite a bit of time. And we could top into, of course, 2026 as well. Very similar to even 2021 because we were getting close to 2022. So, I'm mainly looking at a topping point of this market sometime around fall into like the beginning of 2026. But liquidity is going to continue to improve. And we're mainly looking at the M2 supply here as well for Bitcoin, because you've got, like, I'm sure that you've all been focused on what, Raoul Pal has been talking about with the M2 supply. If you haven't been focused on this, I do think that you're missing a big piece of what's happening with Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is, expanding to the upside. The global M2 supply has been surging. This has been led by some pretty big players. China has been front running a lot of the M2 supply. We're really kind of looking at the US, starting to print quite a bit, and, that will cause the M2 supply itself to explode. But when we look at the global M2 with the 12-week lead compared to Bitcoin itself, we could see that Bitcoin is now starting to catch up quickly to the global M2. In fact, again, Raoul Pal and Julian from, GMI, they were right on the ball with this. The bottoming zone they highlighted around Bitcoin, because that's exactly where the M2 supply bottomed. And if we're really kind of going off of the 12-week lead, it timed it perfectly. Bitcoin then bottomed, and now we're well over, $100,000. And if you actually look at this, we might have a slight sell-off initially, but the next big push will take us to over 110K. And from that point on, well, we target $140,000, $160,000 for Bitcoin. Now, that's a pretty good push, right? That would definitely make a lot of XRP holders happy, because we should be in a alt season during that time as well, because Bitcoin dominance does look pretty weak. But what if I told you that that's just a starting point, that Bitcoin could go much higher? Well, that's what Tom Lee is saying. In fact, there's two video clips. Number one, we have Tom Lee says, now that, the leveraging is done, I think that Bitcoin is going to catch up to gold. And this is basically just talking about the deleveraging from, gold into crypto. Now, he said this back towards the end of April into the beginning of May, and that's exactly what ended up happening, right? Gold started to become boring, so then we started to see the big rotation back into Bitcoin. But check it out.
Bitcoin up almost 3.5% as well. For more on this, I'm already talking to you and I haven't introduced you. Let's bring in Tom Lee, head of research at Fundstrat, chief investment officer at Fundstrat Capital, as well as a CNBC contributor. And I don't remember whether it was you or Pump when we were talking about Bitcoin sort of stuck under 85,000 with gold going up every day. And it was either you or Pump that said Bitcoin usually follows a couple of months later, but has a much bigger move.
That was probably Pump.
Probably, yeah. He's pretty bullish.
Yes.
Have you noticed anything similar to that? I mean, that's a pretty big move. And in the past, gold's been leaving in the past near term, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. This year, maybe. We have seen gold leave Bitcoin in the dust and go to new highs. Looks like it'll do 4,000 easily, right? Do you think Bitcoin eventually catches some of the same money, the same bid?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin earlier this year may have been struggling with some of the deleveraging that was happening for institutional investors.
Just selling what they could.
Yeah, selling what they could, and I think that suppressed Bitcoin, especially over weekends. But now that deleveraging is done, I think that Bitcoin is going to catch up to gold, and Bitcoin's old high was over 110,000. So I think there is a lot of room to catch up as a sort of non-dollar asset.
As for the equity markets, you think stocks are attractive, but uncertainty is still the name of the game, and it's going to persist. Do you think the high in the VIX, what did you say that was on April 7th, that holds?
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to match that level of fear again. So I think we're probably past peak uncertainty. I mean, even with this Fed controversy, but I don't know if we're past maximum pain. I think that there's still risk that the economic consequences are going to cause markets to be hesitant, but it's going to be hard to match that fear again. So I think a structural low did take place.
And I completely agree with Tom Lee, right? I do think that we have witnessed a significant low. The fear was definitely at peak levels during roughly, I would argue, the end of February into like March, into even like the middle of April. There was significant fear across the board. Mainstream media was highlighting the tariff war and the trade war ongoing for weeks. And now, it's a completely different view of the market. So I do agree with Tom Lee here. Now, on top of this, what was his price prediction for Bitcoin? Well, Tom Lee, Bitcoin could hit $250,000 this year. Banks are about to FOMO into crypto. We are not bullish enough. And this is just more recent. Check it out.
What is the movement in Bitcoin say to you? So we're at 91,000. What is that? What is that a signal or a sign of anything in this sort of analysis?
Stupid Fed.
Yeah.
It's not cutting.
Yeah, Bitcoin's down roughly 15% from its highs, which for a hyper-volatile asset is a pretty normal correction, and it is slightly following global liquidity, but we're pretty early in this halving cycle. So to me, I think Bitcoin in the near term, again, our technician thinks 70,000 is where we can sort of make a stand. Means you're getting a big opportunity because I think Bitcoin's going to be one of the best performing assets.
So, hold on, but you still think it goes all the way down to 70,000, or you think that's the floor, in which case you would still buy at this price?
Yeah, so there's Fibonacci's. So one level would be 70.
Let's say that again.
There's retracement levels. So you pull back from where you rallied.
Right.
So 70 is one level. It could go to as low as the 50s. But that's, again, not a new level. It's just where it touches before it begins to rally.
Okay, let me ask you a different question. For those folks who are watching who are not in Bitcoin or are thinking about buying Bitcoin at these prices, are you saying that this is a fair and good price to get in, or are you saying wait because you think it's going farther down?
Bitcoin is something you need to be long-term focused. I don't think anyone's going to lose money buying here at 90. If they're trying to time this, maybe they'll get lucky and it goes to 70. But to me, Bitcoin could be significantly higher this year, maybe 200, 250. So I think 90 is still a good entry point.
Now, of course, I have a completely different outlook when it comes to Bitcoin than Tom, so I can't completely agree with him on this $250,000 target. But I wouldn't write off the idea of Bitcoin, potentially hitting close to $200,000 simply because of how much demand there is for Bitcoin right now from the institutional side, especially around the ETF volume and hype. But on top of that, it really does seem like the market is opening up yet again, right around the exact same time that the Fed is getting closer to potentially choosing to cut rates or not. And even right now, I mean, Bitcoin is trading at the time that I'm recording this about $102,000 is trading at. If we do fill this complete gap here on Bitcoin down to about 97 point almost 8K, total price move to $250,000 if Tom Lee is right on the ball here, 155% move. Right now, XRP trading at about $2.50 some cents. If I actually refresh this, I think that it's a little bit lower. So $2.45. On the price chart, we have about $2.44. But, just a 300% move from where we are at right now on this price chart, that would take us to about $9.96. Considering that XRP continues to outpace Bitcoin's gains, right? So if we actually compare this to Bitcoin and we go back on the 1 year, XRP compared to Bitcoin percentage-wise, it's almost like an 8x difference, okay? If we continue to outpace Bitcoin's gain by 8x as it has in the last 12 months, that would be a 1,244% push to the upside. That would be a $33, almost a $34 XRP. Now, do I think that that's ridiculous? Not exactly. Do I think that Bitcoin is going to hit $250,000 though? That's the question. And, I don't necessarily think that it does. Again, my overall thought process here is, potentially 200K. If we get to 200K, that would be a very good start. Now, obviously, price-wise on XRP, that would, be different. That would be a different story. I still think that we could hit about $20 to almost $30 on XRP, even if Bitcoin just hit $200,000. But the overall idea here is that if Tom Lee is correct here and we hit 250K on Bitcoin, the higher that Bitcoin goes during alt season, right, while Bitcoin dominance is selling off, the higher that XRP and the entire altcoin market actually goes itself. So this could very well, be a huge move on XRP, depending on how high Bitcoin actually does go. Again, this is, 105% of a push to the upside. That's a very significant push. The total gain on XRP, again, if we're doing the 8x push to the upside, that's still 840%. So if we're thinking about that, all right, 840% from where we are at right now would still take us to roughly about $23. I think that a lot of XRP holders will become extremely wealthy at that time because of how high XRP is. And, even some small amounts of XRP in your portfolio at these prices could be very, very beneficial in terms of the ROI and how much you would have in the portfolio. So I'm definitely focused on what Bitcoin does next, how high Bitcoin can go. I think that a lot of these analysts, we hear predictions get thrown around every single cycle. Most of them do not hit. I do think that this might be one where it's a little bit too bullish, which is always why I think that like 160, 180K is a fair assessment. We'll see on the 200 to 250K. We'll kind of circle back to it. But the higher that Bitcoin does go, the higher XRP goes. So we'll see what happens here. But with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys definitely leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications on because I'm a free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, Nick, thanks for watching. Peace out.